report determined that although only 3% of drivers in Maryland highways equipped their vehicles with radar detectors. Okay, look, again, imagine what is going on over here. What are radar detectors? Yeah. You know what are radar detectors, right? You use radio waves. So essentially, the cops use a radio gun, and they use radio waves to find out the speed at which the vehicles are coming, right? And in case someone is over speeding, they get to know, and then they can stop the person and fine and everything. So what do some people do in their cars? They install radar detectors. That is, in case there are radio waves coming, then they'll be able to detect those, and they'll be able to inform you that, okay, there's checking going on ahead. So then, slow down your speed essentially, right? So those are your radar detectors. So we've been given, let's say there are, say, 10,000 cars in Maryland, yeah, on the highways, and only 3%, which means that, let's say, only, made too big a circle, 300 of them have radar detectors. The cars, only 300 have radar detectors. This is what is given to us, only 3%. Okay. 33. So even though only 3% of drivers have radar detectors, 33% of all vehicles ticketed for exceeding the speed limit were equipped with them. So let's say 100 tickets were given out. Yeah, 100 cars were ticketed. So let's say this. So these are the 100 cars that got tickets. What they are saying is that 33% of these were the ones with radar detectors. Look, think about it. In case there are 100 tickets going on, in case 3% of the cars have radar detectors, if it was unbiased, right, what would you expect? If 100 tickets are going on and there are 3% cars that have radar detectors, I would expect that there wouldn't even be 3% cars of the radar detectors in that, right? Why? Because, they would already know that the checking is going on. That is why they would probably slow down their speed. But even if, let's say, the radar detectors were, not were functioning properly or whatever maybe, I would think that those cars will be proportional in the number of tickets. Maybe out of 100, then there would be 3 cars which would be there in this particular circle. Yeah, the ones who got tickets, 3 of the radar detector cards, RD cars, right? But they are saying it's not 3, it's 33% of these 100. That means 33 of these cars, the RD cars, are in the tickets. You see, 67 people did not have RD, and 33 of the 300 were there in these 100 tickets. What does it tell me? What can I infer from this? I can infer that if you install an RD in your car, your probability of getting a ticket increases for exceeding the speed limit, right? I don't know why, I don't know what is happening, but I can say this much, that your probability of receiving a ticket increases. That makes sense, right? 33% of these tickets are those, the ones who have RD in their car, even though a very small fraction has RD in their car. Make sense? So this is what I can say. Your probability of getting a ticket increases. Okay, look at the conclusion of the author. This. Drivers who equip their vehicles with radar detectors are more likely to exceed the speed limit regularly than are drivers who do not. He's not, the author is not concluding about the probability of getting this ticket. The author is concluding about the likeliness of exceeding the speed limit. Are they the same things? Look, I'm talking about the vehicles ticketed for exceeding the speed limit, right? But here in the conclusion, the author talks about that these people, if you have an RD in your car, then you are more likely to exceed the speed limit. Do you see that there is a gap? Do you see that the conclusion cannot be inferred from the premises? Give it a thought first. Right? Yeah, good, makes sense, right? Makes sense because the data only talks about the tickets, that you are more likely to get a ticket. But the conclusion says that means that you are more likely to drive fast. Look, Why is it that I cannot conclude this from, whatever is given to me? So think about it. Think about this the scenario. There is this radio waves, and there's this radio gun that the cops have, and they're sending out radio waves, and then when it hits a car, it tells the cops about the speed of the car. Yeah. When a car has a radar detector, and this is just a hypothetical situation, why am I saying that getting a ticket is not equivalent to speeding? Why is it that these cars may not be more likely to exceed the speed limit? Yeah. Why? So hypothetical situation, what in case, when the radar detector, when the radio waves hit the radar detector, then there is some interference which happens, and that is why there is some lag or whatever. I don't know the science behind it. All I'm saying is that perhaps when the radio waves reach back to the cops, maybe they can detect that there is a radar detector in this car, and maybe they pay extra attention to that car, and that is why those cars get caught more often. Maybe it's not that they are speeding more often. It is that there are some other reasons because of which those cars are getting caught more often. Or let's say, when a person has a radar detector, then the person also installs some other features in the car. Maybe they all come as a package or whatever. Usually maybe he detect, and then the and that has some kind of interference signal with the radio waves, and that is why there is more focus on that particular car. We don't know. You understand? It is not necessary that they are speeding more than others. It is that they are getting caught more than others. So there is something because of which they're getting caught more than others, but it doesn't mean that they are necessarily speeding more than others, right? So there is the gap over here, right? What my premises tell me and what the conclusion says, there is a gap over here. All right. So the conclusion above depends on which of the following assumptions. A. Drivers who equip their vehicles with radar detectors are less likely to be ticketed for exceeding the speed limit than are drivers who do not. This is not an assumption, of course. We know that the opposite of this is being given as is something that I can very easily infer from my premises, right? I know that the ones who equip their vehicles with radar detectors, they are more likely to be ticketed, right? Not less likely. So I know this is incorrect. This is not an assumption. B. Drivers who are ticketed for exceeding the speed limit are more likely to exceed the speed limit regularly than are drivers who are not ticketed. Now, this makes sense. Now, as I said, there was a gap between my premises and my conclusion, right? What was the gap? The premises said that these drivers are more likely to be ticketed. My conclusion said that these drivers are more likely to exceed the speed limit regularly. So my assumption is that the ones who are ticketed more often are more likely to be ticketed. They are also more likely to exceed the speed limit regularly. If this were true, I would need this to be true for my conclusion to make sense, right? My assumption would often bridge the gap between premises and conclusion, right? At least one gap between the premise and conclusion. It does. The premises talk about only the probability of getting a ticket, whereas the conclusion talks about the probability of overspeeding. And this bridges that gap, that the drivers who are ticketed for exceeding the speed limit, they are more likely to actually exceed the speed limit, right? It is bridging the ticketing and the actual exceeding the speed limit gap. Make sense? Any doubts here? Does this make sense? Yes, that's true. So it is one of those, subtle things. It is, again, it is how an assumption question is, right? You might feel that, hey, it's so obvious. But then, as I said, if it is not mentioned, then it is not obvious. That is the reason we focus on our premises, laser sharp focus on what is given to us. The conclusion is going to jump the gun somewhere, right? And we have to see what is it that is not given, but the author has assumed in his conclusion, right? As we said, most of the CR arguments are bad arguments, right? There are places where the author has not inferred from the given premises. We wouldn't make those inferences. We wouldn't make those conclusions. The author has made a mistake. There is something that he's assumed, or some flaw that is there, or he's jumped to the conclusion, and I can strengthen it or I can weaken it, right? There is always scope in the conclusion. It's not derived from the premises, right? That is why it is an inductive logic argument, right? Yeah. Just referring back to the other two workshops that, we've discussed this in detail in the other two workshops, right? Just, yeah. All right. C, the number of vehicles that were ticketed for exceeding the speed limit was greater than the number of vehicles that were equipped with radar detectors. Is it necessary for a conclusion? That the in fact, it's not, right? We said that it is possible that there were like 100 tickets and there were 300 cars that are radar detected. It just depends on how many cars are there and how many tickets. The tickets could be a very small proportion of the total number of cars. It's easily possible. We know that the number of cars is whatever, 3% of those have RDs. It is possible that only 1% cars get a ticket in the, let's say, entire year, right? So of course, this doesn't need to be true at all for a conclusion. Okay. D, many of the vehicles that were ticketed for exceeding the speed limit were ticketed more than once in the time period covered by the report. Again, it may seem that there might be some relevance to this, but if I go back, I'm going to look at the numbers given to me. It says that, equipped their vehicles with radar detectors. Only 3% of drivers equip their vehicles with radar detectors. So we're talking about the number of cars. 33% of all vehicles ticketed for exceeding the speed. So we're talking about the number of cars. Then drivers who equip their vehicles with radar detectors are more likely to exceed the speed limit. So we are not talking about the number of tickets at any point. We're talking about the number of cars that get ticketed. We're not talking about whether one car got 2 tickets or 4 tickets or 10 tickets, right? Isn't it? We're just talking about how many cars got ticketed. The entire scope of the argument is just revolving around the number of cars here, right? So then, how many times each car got ticketed? Irrelevant. There, of course, there's no assumption there then. Yeah. Okay, E. Drivers on Maryland highways exceeded the speed limit more often than did drivers on other state highways not covered in the report. Of course, we read this and we move on because we know this is totally irrelevant. Neither do our premises nor does our conclusion mention anything about other, highways, other state highways, etc. Nothing, right? This is completely out of scope for us. So this is, of course, not an assumption, right? Look, my assumption will not assume something about a variable that has not been touched in either the premises or the conclusion. It will give me a new relation between the variables touched upon in the premises and the conclusion. It will not bring in an entirely new variable. I know my assumption brings in new information, but in terms of connecting two variables that are already mentioned, only about those variables can I assume that this must be true. I cannot, introduce a brand new variable and say that in my assumption, I'm assuming that this must be true about that variable, which is not a part of my argument at all, right? So other state highways, irrelevant. Ignore. Yeah? Any doubts here?